Today we're covering everything you need to know about the drawing tools inside of TradingView. By default, they are set up to be on the left-hand sidebar of the platform, and what we'll do on today's session is start from the top and work our way down towards the very bottom, covering all of the in-depth menus for each individual tool. That way you can truly customize any drawing it is that you wish to apply to your chart. If that sounds good, let's jump right into it. The first one up at the very top is going to be our cursor tools. By default, we have a crosshair with a cross at the intersection as the cursor. Now, this is just obviously going to track wherever you move your mouse, but we can change a couple of things about it. The first thing is that we can change the cross to a dot, and notice again that it's not actually the crosshairs that change, it's the little icon where that intersection takes place. And then the next thing we could do is to change this to an arrow. Notice that we do not have crosshairs associated with this feature, but instead on the price axis, we're going to get a little label that tracks where we're at, as well as a label on the x-axis for time, tracking where we go horizontally. So that's the pointer function, and we cannot add crosshairs to it. And then down at the very bottom of this dropdown, we have the eraser, obviously used to erase drawings, which we currently have none of. So we'll recap this one as we start building some things out on the chart. I do quickly want to point out that on the cross feature, if you're not so in love with the crosshairs in the background, that's the dashed line that goes from top to bottom, right to left. If you don't like that, you can turn it off by clicking on the little gear icon here in the top right-hand corner of the platform. What this should do is open up a chart settings window, and in here you want to make sure you're on the appearance subtab and move to the crosshair section right here. If you want to turn it off completely, go ahead and click on the little color palette and drag your opacity all the way down to 0. Notice now that we just have the cross. Perhaps another good example is to change this back to the dot, and you can see that change take a place. And what that's truly changing about the platform is really just the icon, not the crosshairs themselves. If you do like the crosshairs, but you're not in love with the gray color, that's fine. Just turn your opacity back up and knock yourself out with whatever custom color you'd like. Red, green, yellow, orange, blue, whatever you'd like, you can pick and activate here inside of TradingView. The other thing is down at the very bottom, you can increase the thickness. Again, I probably wouldn't recommend something like this. It's a bit of an eyesore, but it is something that you have control over. Then you can also change from a dashed line to a solid line. That would look something like this, or from a solid line to a dotted line. In my opinion, a little bit more subdued, much more subtle, much more pleasant on the eyes. If you ever forget, how to change this back to default, don't worry. You can come down to where it says template right here, drop the menu down and click apply defaults. But please be aware that although yes, this will technically reset your crosshair, it's going to reset every other setting that you have in this window. So if you've come up with a custom chart layout in the background that you like, then I don't necessarily know that it would be wise for you to apply all of the defaults. Unfortunately, you'd probably have to come back in and change your crosshair manually. But if I press apply defaults, notice that boom, this does change back to gray, dashed, and a thin line. Again, I personally like the dotted line. It's a little bit more subdued, so we'll use that and press OK. As we click and drag on the chart itself, we can go side to side, but we cannot go up and down. That's because our price axis over here is actually locked with this little auto function in the bottom right-hand corner. So there's two ways we can turn it off. Number one's pretty straightforward. You just click to turn that off, and the auto scale is turned off, and now we have free control of the chart. If we turn this back on, the secondary way to turn that off would be to click and drag anywhere in your price axis, and what that will do is deactivate the auto scale, and now once again we have free form control of the chart window itself. We'll pop auto back on, and with all of that out of the way, let's dive right into our first major drawing tool. It's going to be right up here, second in line, the trend line tool. Now this is a little deceiving because at first glance you might think, okay, I just have access to a trend line, but if you click on the little arrow to the right here, it's actually all of these trend line tools that are underneath that trend line. What we're going to do in today's video is spend a lot of time on the trend line itself and establish a really strong foundation for all of the common settings in many of our different tools. So if the first part seems like it's taking a while to get through, don't worry. It's really laying the foundation to make everything else go much more smoothly. Once we understand the trend line settings, everything else should fall into line perfectly. So let's click and activate that. You'll notice it's activated because the trend line tool is now highlighted in blue, and we get this little icon and sort of menu on the screen. screen. Now, before we even draw a trend line, we can elect to choose a certain template. We don't have any saved, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, but if you wanted to before you drew something, you could change that here. So let's start drawing. All we have to do to activate the first anchor point is to click, and then we move our cursor, and we can activate the second anchor point by clicking once again. Now, a couple of things have popped up on our chart screen that we should talk about here. Number one is the quick menu option. That's going to be this bar right around here. On the price axis, we have this blue highlighted area, which is going to tell us where this trend line exists on the price scale. And then the same thing, but on our date and time axis down here along the very bottom. So what we're going to do is spend our time going through our quick menu. If the quick menu disappears for you for some reason, it's probably because your trend line is not activated anymore. If I click off of the trend line, the quick menu goes away. If I single click on the trend line, the quick menu pops back up. The quick menu will be associated with whatever active drawing you have on your screen. For example, if I were to draw another trend line here, let's say that we were looking at this sort of support portion right here, this quick menu is going to be in relationship to this trend line right here because this is the active trend line. You'll always know what's active, one, based on the highlight down below and on the price axis here, but also because the terminal ends of the trend line will have these little anchor points active on there, whereas this one you can clearly see does not have those little dot handles on the very end, right? So to avoid a confusion, I will just sort of remove that and reactivate our primary trend line. And now what we'll do is just walk through all of the different options inside of our quick menu. The first one is that template dropdown. So if I click on this, we can save a drawing template as a new template, and we'll do this towards the end of adjusting some of the look and feel here so we can illustrate how templates work, or we can reset any sort of line that we've created to the default by clicking Apply Default Drawing Template. Now, this blue 2-pixel solid line is the default. So if I click on this, nothing will happen. But if we start making changes, which we're about to do, we can always go back to default by using that option there. The first thing is, of course, a pencil and a color icon. What do you think that's for? It's to change our line color. I'm going to use a white color because it contrasts nicely on the dark background, but again, you can add any color you'd like here to your trend line. You can even add custom colors by clicking on this little plus icon here in the bottom section of this pane. And what you'll notice is you get a little hue and saturation slider. So you can choose whatever color you'd like, adjust the hue over here. Let's say that this is looking like a good blue. We can add that. And now, again, that's actually kind of quite close to the default, but you get the gist. That's going to show up as a custom color right here. For the sake of today's example, we will use white, which again contrasts nicely on the dark background. The next thing is our line width. By default, it's going to be set to 2. I personally like them a little bit thinner, so I'll change it to 1, but also know you could set it to 4, so a little bit thicker, right? We'll change that back to 1 and carry on here. The next one is going to be the style, and this is in reference to solid line, dashed line, or dotted line. Personally, I'm a big fan of dashed line on our trend lines and solid lines on our horizontal levels, which we'll get to in just a moment. So for now, we'll change that to a dashed line, but that's where you would access those different types of settings. The next one is a gear icon right here, and this is going to open up the full settings menu. You can also achieve the same thing by double-clicking on the trend line itself, but before we dive into that full menu, let's round out our quick menu. So after the gear, we're going to skip that and go to add alert. This is going to be an alert specifically in relationship to whatever drawing it is that you have activated. So if I click on this, notice that we're creating an alert based on it crossing this trend line. Alerts in TradingView are a whole separate video for a different time. So if you're interested in an alerts video sort of tutorial, let me know down below. Otherwise, we will continue along for now. Again, there's just so much information to sort of cover in each of these. Notice as I click create, we get the little alert icon. Again, that just means that it's active. We just want to single click and turn that alert off by clicking here and deleting, okay? Delete the alert, yes, and now we're just left with the trend line. So again, this is a full separate video, and again, let me know if you'd like that, but for now, we're just gonna move along. The next up is the lock icon, pretty self-explanatory. While it's unlocked, I can click and move this trend line anywhere I'd like by clicking on the line itself, or I could click on each individual anchor and move each anchor one part at a time. If we have this locked, obviously, self-explanatory, we can't move anything. I can't move the trend line as a whole, and I also cannot move each individual anchor by clicking and dragging there. Instead, the chart just kind of wiggles around, right? So we'll unlock that. The trash can, very self-explanatory. We're not going to press it. That would, of course, delete the trend line from our chart screen. And then at the very end, we have this More tab. What's underneath More? So we have visual order, and this is going to be in reference to any sort of layering that's taking place on your chart screen. If you have multiple drawings, let's say that you have a rectangle that's overlapping the trend line, you can bring the trend line in front of the rectangle or send it behind the rectangle rectangle based on the options here. We also have the clone option. If I press this, notice that we've just cloned the exact same trend line. We have two of them now. We can copy that trend line. And there's two ways that we can paste it. The first way would be to right click and click paste. That's going to put another copy on the screen in front of us, or I can press Command V on my keyboard and it might look like nothing took place, but it's just going to paste it in the exact same spot. So we technically had two there that were overlapping. Let's go back into the More option, and down at the very bottom we have the Hide ability. So if I hide this trend line, it disappears, and let's hide this one as well. So how do we get these things back? Because if I hover the cursor over here, nothing's going on. I also can't click and sort of reactivate that hidden trend line. Where did it go? There's really two ways that we can bring up and sort of re-find, if you will, these hidden trend lines. The first one would be to right click on the chart window and go sort of towards the lower third where it says Object Tree right here. When you click on the Object Tree, it brings up a sidebar, and this is going to show us all of the drawings on the chart currently. So you can see those two trend lines that we've hidden are one right here and two right here. The little eye icon is crossed out, meaning that they are hidden. To turn them back on, you would just click on the eye and they reappear. The second way that we can achieve the same object tree is to click on this little icon down in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. If I click it once, it will disappear. If I click it again, it will reappear. Magic, right? So what do we have in the object tree window? What else can we do in here? Pretty self-explanatory. If you click on a line, you're going to get your quick menu, but you're also going to get some options in the object tree. You can lock it, again, meaning that you won't be able to move that now on the chart screen. You can hide it, which we just covered, or you can delete it with the little X, right? If I delete it, it will just disappear. You can also make groupings of different drawings that you've made. So if I click here and I'm holding Shift on my keyboard, clicking on the last option, that highlights all of them. And now I'm going to go ahead and click on the little folder icon. It's created a group of those trend lines. You can rename this group by right-clicking, renaming, and let's go ahead and just call this TL group. There we go. Now we have a group of trend lines and we're good to go. Now you have master controls on the entire group as well. Let's say you want to lock everything in the group. You can of course do that. You can hide the entire group, re-show the entire group, and you can also delete all of them all in one fell swoop by deleting the entire group, right? So if I press X here, they all disappear and our object tree is now blank. So that's a pretty in-depth look at the object tree and sort of our top level look at the quick menu, right? This one up here. But what we didn't cover was the template tool. So let's go ahead and recap that now. Now that we have a look and feel that we find desirable for our trend line, what we'll do is click on the templates and we will save this drawing template as, let's just call it TL for the sake of today's video, trend line. If I press save, nothing will really happen here. But let's just say, because what's interesting about TradingView is that it will actually remember the last styling of any sort of drawing that you've made. So if I reactivate the trendline tool, notice how it's automatically remembering that it's the white dashed line because this is the last type of drawing that we've made. But let's say that we really change things up here. We get kind of crazy with it. We make it yellow, really thick, and I don't know, let's go with dotted. And I don't know, that's kind of all we've covered so far. I don't want to give away too much, but so we have this different type of style, right? If I go back to the trendline tool, again, think it will remember exactly what the last styling was that we applied. If we want to recapture what we've done here by saving this template for the white trend line, all we have to do is drop down our menu and add the trend line sort of template to that drawing. So if I click on this, notice how it now takes that sort of effect. And the same thing will happen here if I choose TL, right? So that's kind of how you can set up different templates. The other thing that I want to point out here while we're sort of doing this that might be useful is you can set up different templates for different types of things, right? So a trend line can change colors, right? If you're, of course, looking at resistance, you might want to make that red, and maybe you think resistance deserves a solid line. You could save this now as a new drawing template and call it RES for resistance, right? We'll press save, and then we'll set up a new one on this style right here. We'll change it to green, and we'll go with a dotted line, and we'll change it to 3 pixel. Let's actually go 4. Full width because we want strong support to hold, right? So let's go ahead and save this drawing template as SUP for support, and we'll press save. So now we've got those two templates created. I'm going to delete these two trend lines now. So what we'll do is show you the example of the eraser tool. I'm going to click on that and that disappears from there. The other thing we can do is click on something and press backspace on our keyboard. That will of course also delete that drawing that you had active. So here we go. Remember before we even jumped into it, I said when you get this little icon, you can also change the template before you even make a drawing. This is how you would do it. Let's say that we're scouting out some area of resistance. I can change this to resistance. And now as I make this drawing, it's going to sort of by not default, because we literally selected it, but it is going to use that template that we've just applied. Let's say that now we're scouting out some type of support in the market. And again, these are kind of arbitrary just for the sake of example today. If we grab the support portion and come in from here and do something like this, notice now we have that support template added to that particular drawing. So now we've got some madness on the chart. There's a couple of ways that we can completely clear things up and start from scratch. The first way would be to right-click on the screen and remove drawings. This is going to remove everything on the screen in front of us if we were to click on this option. We could, of course, use the eraser tool that we just explored over here. And we could also use this little trash icon right here. So let's walk through a couple of these different ones. If I click and activate this, we'll try this trash can. That removes that. And if I press this, it removes everything on the screen in front of us. So we're truly starting from scratch now. Now let's dive into the full menu instead of just using the quick menu. So what I'm going to do is load up our TL, which is going to be the white dashed line, right? We're going to draw in a trend line. That's good. And now we have the quick menu. But now we want to get into the full menu. So there's two ways to do that. You can click on the gear icon that says settings. And what this will do is it'll bring up this dialog box. Or note you can do the same exact thing by double clicking on the trend line itself. If I double click, we get the same exact window. At the very top, we have trend line, which is going to be the name of the trend line itself. If we click on the little pencil, we can give it a custom name. So let's say resistance from the highs. There we go. And if we click off, it's going to save that, and you'll notice that that name change takes effect in our object tree. So if we're ever curious what trend line we're on, labeling them is a good way to sort of keep tabs of what is what. After that, let's move from the top to bottom, left to right through our submenus in here. Style is going to be very similar to everything we just saw in the quick menu. We can change the color as well as the line thickness in this particular window. We can change from a solid line to a dashed line to a dotted line, and we can also, a new feature here that we didn't have prior, add arrow ends to the terminals of our trend line. So if you want an arrow facing left, you would do this, and if you want an arrow facing right, you would do this. Let me show you that on the chart now. You can see there's a small arrow here. It's a little bit tough to pick out with the dotted line sort of look and feel. So if we double click in here, and quickly change that to a solid line, notice that your arrows are much easier to identify now with, just easier to see, right? It's as simple as that. So clicking back in, we're going to go ahead and change this back to our dashed line. We will change the ends back to normal. Let's walk through it from top to bottom now. So extend left line, very self-explanatory, right? Extends it all the way to the left. Extend right line, extends it all the way to the right. Middle point, if I go ahead and move our text box here, our menu window rather, you'll notice right here, we now have the midpoint of the line being shown. Price labels, what this is going to do is if I click off of this and unhighlight the trend line itself, the price labels will remain on the price axis. So remember how we had that blue highlight in the past going from top to bottom or bottom to top, however you want to refer to it. And then when we deactivate the trend line, that disappears. If we add the labels, you can clearly see them showing up on our price axis here. Clicking back in, we're going to turn off the middle point, turn off the price labels, and we'll drag this off to the right. Stats is up next. If you want to see the price range, you can do so. And what that's going to do is add a little information tag to our trend line. You can add the bars range. You can add the date and time range, the distance, and note that these are different things, okay? So 74 bars are technically the trading days, 108 days are the calendar days, and the distance is a pixel amount. None of those three things are the same, which is why they're all sort of different options to turn on and off in your stats bar. Notice that the distance changes as I expand and contract the zoom on the chart, right? It's gone from 765. If I scrunch it up, we're back at 545, right? So all three different things. Just be mindful of that if you're trying to look at these as measuring tools. Next up, we can add the angle. And then lastly, always show stats or never show stats, right? If I turn this on, it's always going to show this information tag. If I turn this off, press OK, and then deactivate the trend line, it disappears. It will only show back up if I hover over the trend line or click to activate it. If we go back into the full settings menu and turn that to always on and press OK, notice that even as the trend line is deactivated and even as we hover, it will constantly remain on. So fairly straightforward there, but certainly worth talking about. The other thing we can point out is that you can put the stats on the right-hand edge of the trend line, the midpoint, or the left in this drop-down right here. So there's left, and there is the center, which would align perfectly with our midpoint toggle that we have right here. Now keep in mind, if you want to update your trend line template, all you have to do is come back down into Template, and then save this as and overwrite whatever it is that you had originally, or potentially create a new template, right? So if I press save here and press OK to overwrite it, what we'll do now is if we come to create a new trend line and apply the trend line sort of template to it, do something like this. Notice how now we're automatically getting that stats bar, and it's always showing in the center because that's what we just overrode the template with. I'm going to click to activate, deselect, or excuse me, delete rather, not deselect, throw it out, and we'll double click back into our full menu here on our trend line. I'm going to turn some of these things off. I personally find them to be a little bit distracting, and the midpoint can kind of stay there. We'll just save this and overwrite our TL, so we're back to sort of scratch here with the addition of the midpoint, right? So save, and we will continue through our dialog box. Next up, we have the text option, and this is just simply going to add text to your trend line. If you click the little checkbox and type in some sort of text here, we'll type test, you can see that showing up in the midpoint. That's because in our text alignment, we have it showing on top of the trend line and located in the center. You can, of course, change these things. If you want it to overlap the trend line, you can change it to middle. Now it shows up directly on the center. And in here, we can change it to the right, or we could change it up to the left, and we can also change it to below the trend line, right? So let's change it to below, and all the way on the right, you can now see that little blue word test. We can change the color to white to sort of be the same as our trend line. Let's say that we want the size to increase a little bit so it's actually legible. We've changed the size to 32. We can make it bold or italic or both. You can do that there. And this is just kind of how you add text to these things. Again, if you want to update your template with this new styling, you need to resave the template, okay? So I'm going to uncheck that to turn that off, and that's going to disappear. The next portion is going to be our coordinate window. Now, this one is where it gets a little bit confusing. The first two boxes, very straightforward. Here and here are both going to be price, right? This is the price of the left-hand side, and this is the price of the right-hand side. So left here, right here. You can see those prices as well reflected in our highlighted labels as the trend line is active. The next part that's a little bit confusing though is the bar number. Now, TradingView does this sort of weird thing where it calculates based on the last historic bar. Now you might be saying, well, what's the last historic bar? And that is a fantastic question. I don't exactly know how that's calculated. I scoured the documentation, still couldn't figure it out. But if we change this to 0, that is going to be the last historic bar. I'll press OK. Now, if we scrunch up the chart, we'll notice that for some reason, TradingView is saying that the last historic bar, bar number 0, where the count starts from, is technically the 14th of April 2021. Again, why that's the first historic bar or last historic bar, I don't entirely know. It's just one of these things we've got to deal with, which is kind of unfortunate, considering if you wanted to be really precise with when a trend line started and ended, it's not as straightforward as just typing in a date range, which is, again, kind of unfortunate, but just one of these things that we've got to work around. So that's the coordinates tab. The last one here is visibility. Visibility is a really cool one because we can create trend lines that show up on 15-minute charts, not on the daily timeframes or on the monthly timeframes, right? You can select what timeframes you want your trend line to be visible for. So let's just, as an example, we are looking at the daily timeframe chart. That's what this little D stands for in the top left of the screen. If we uncheck the daily timeframe, notice that the trend line disappears. We are no longer electing to show it or make it visible on the daily time frame. And interestingly enough, in our little object tree, we now have a yellow eyeball, meaning that it is semi-visible on a different time frame. So if you ever run into the issue where you're missing a trend line or a drawing in general, definitely double check your object tree. And if you've got a sort of yellowish orange eye here, it probably means that your visibility settings are altered and you're only showing it on specific time frames. If I toggle the days back on, this is now showing up here. And another example, so let's actually do it this way. So I'll toggle days on, or excuse me, off by unchecking it. And instead what we'll do is we'll change the time frame here to a weekly time frame, and our trend line shows back up, right? Because it's active and visible on the weekly time frame. You can see right here that is toggled to on. So I'm just going to turn everything on so it's available everywhere, and that's been a really thorough run through of all of the settings really for our trendline tools. And this is going to serve as a really solid foundation for almost everything else inside of the platform. So I'm going to press OK, and we're going to continue on our merry way here through our sort of tutorial. So back on down to the daily time frame, let's start getting crazy with some of the drawing capabilities here. We're going to open up this tab. The arrow ray is pretty self-explanatory. It's going to give you an anchor point and an arrow end on one of these particular ends of your trend line. All of the same settings apply as what we just discussed inside of the trendline tool. So no reason to rehash all of this stuff, and you can start to create your own templates for each of these drawings. What else do we have in here? I'm not going to go through every single one. I would say that the ray is a fairly important important one. Again, this will just continue for infinity to the right. Remember that you can do the same thing with your trend line tool by coming into the master settings. So if I click on the trend line, right, go to the master settings for style and go to extend line to the right. That's essentially the same thing as array, right? So you can get crazy with this stuff. You can customize as much or as little as you would like. I'm going to X that out so that will sort of, I guess it did hold without even pressing OK. So I'm going to turn that off, then press OK. There we go. And we're going to continue through our menu here. So we've covered the ray. Info line is going to give us that info box, right? Extended line is going to be extending both sides of the trend line. The trend angles is a bit of an interesting one, right? If I do something like this, it's going to tell us where we're at from a trajectory standpoint. You can see 33 degrees there. And again, all of the same customization features are available. Let's continue along. We've got horizontal line. This is a good one for mapping out quick supports and resistances. So if you click, you'll just get a horizontal line that continues for infinite to the future, as well as in the past. Again, you can double click. You can change to maybe support if you want green and save this as, let's go with SUP for support and save. And now again, if you wanted to add another sort of line and that wants to use that same support template, boom, there you go. Now you've got another support line. The chart's starting to get a little bit crazy with all of these drawings. So again, we can just click on this little trash icon and clear up everything with one click. Boom, all drawings have been removed. We'll continue through our drop down here. Horizontal ray is going to, of course, be just that. It's going to start at that click point and then go forward in future forever instead of extending to the left and right like the horizontal ray that we just saw. Right, that was this one up here, horizontal line. Vertical line is going to do the same thing, but vertically, obviously. The same thing will hold true with the cross line. It's going to give us literally the crosshairs, but stapled in place here. And you can change all of the same color settings. That goes without saying. Let's continue along and get into some of the more interesting stuff. Parallel channel. Let's actually clear this drawing set up. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to remove drawings here at the bottom. Now let's try again with our parallel channel. Let's say that we were looking at this as a channel, right? I can drag my cursor and now you can see we've got a descending channel in place. So all I had to do was draw one trend line from here to here, and then as I drag for that third click, it's going to be the distance for that channel to essentially exist. A couple of different settings here that you might be seeing is this little paint bucket for the fill. That's going to be the background that's shaded here. If I click on this and change the opacity lower, you can see what I'm directly impacting, right? And you can change the color. It doesn't have to be the same as the stroke. Again, you can brighten it right up. That's a little bit insane to look at, but all of these settings are, of course, customizable, and you can save them as templates for each of these different types of drawing tools. What else do we have in here worth talking about? The regression trend is quite cool. What this one does, we can click to give an anchor point and then carry forward in future. It doesn't really matter where you click because what's going to happen is a linear regression will be put into place. So again, we anchored this here, not technically at this level, but at this point in time. And then we anchored the second click at this point in time, not necessarily at this level. So it's calculating a linear regression and forming some sort of channel based on those options. If you want to talk about the settings of the channel, you can come into here. And you can, of course, change your deviations in the input section right here. So again, depending on the drawing tool that you're looking at, there may or may not be additional inputs or style capabilities for that particular tool. So I would always encourage you to explore the full menu, not just the quick menu, whenever you're getting into a new particular setting. So that's what we've got on the regression trend. What else do we have in this drop down to wrap it up? Flat bottom. Let's see what we have here. This is going to draw first an angle, and then of course you can add in something like this to draw in a megaphone top or potentially an ascending triangle. Let's see if we can find an example of that. Unfortunately, not really. Nothing's like jumping off the page to me. So we don't really have an example of an ascending triangle, but perhaps it would be. It's really unfortunate that I can't just pick one out here. I don't know, let's just, for example's sake, do something like this, right? So that's kind of an ascending triangle. Not really exact in terms of pattern perspective, but you get the gist, right? There's your trend line, there's your flat top, you break out over the highs, that's kind of the drawing. I would personally prefer just drawing in one by one, a horizontal level, and then some sort of trend line to mark off the sort of support portion, but to each their own. If you want to use the right technical tool for that, that is a capability here inside of TradingView. I'm going to go ahead and clean up the drawing set once again, start from scratch. What else do we have? A disjointed channel. This is just going to be some sort of wacky thing that looks like this. This will always be a mirror image of what we have down on the bottom, so perhaps closer to a symmetrical triangle instead of some sort of ascending or descending triangle. I have the drawing activated, and I'm just going to press backspace on my keyboard to get rid of it. Now, something interesting here, which hopefully you've stuck around for, is that they've thrown in this dropdown the anchored VWAP. I'm not sure why they put it here, but this is a great tool and certainly something worth paying attention to. So if I click anchored VWAP, it's going to bring up the VWAP and calculate it based on wherever I tell it to start. So if we come in from this high, we now have this line on the screen, which is the anchored VWAP. I think I've already changed the settings to make it this yellow, really thick line. Yeah, see, yellow VWAP is in place there. But if I apply the default, there's kind of the default look. You can, of course, change all of these things in our style menu here. So again, there's your bands multiplier. For style, there's the VWAP itself. So if we wanted to achieve that same sort of thick yellow look that we just had, I would change this to yellow. I would change the thickness up to solid. And for the lower band, I would uncheck that to turn it off. Upper band, uncheck that to turn it off, and turn off the background as well. The price label option right here is going to be in reference to the VWAP value itself, which we can currently see is 41.4767 based on our anchor point. So that's the anchored VWAP. That's where it exists in the platform. Again, I'm not sure why it's in this particular menu, but it is, and it's a really fantastic tool for any sort of analysis going forward from a particular point in time. So we're going to remove that, and we're going to get into our next drop down here. So we have the Fibonacci tools. Now you can go crazy with this, and basically this is a laser light show, anything underneath the fib retracements and fib-based extensions, but I quickly want to show you them. So fib retracement, let's say that we're looking from the lows up to the highs. This is pretty overbearing in terms of the rainbow that is on the screen here. So of course, I would recommend that you change some of these things. We can click on the little pencil icon, and this is going to be a master control for everything. So watch, as I click on the pencil, and let's just change it to a subdued blue, right? Everything will now be blue instead of each individual retracement having a different color sort of spectrum. If I click to the full menu, this is where you can, of course, change all of those individual components. So you can change the 0% to be white, the 100% to be white as well. That would sort of cap things off. You can turn things on and off to either show or hide. And what else can you do in here? Let's go ahead and change this to green, right? We can do something like that. Maybe this one goes yellow. So you can get crazy with your different sort of fills and backgrounds that you apply here. You can change the opacity. I would certainly not want it to be that bright, so you can drop it down. And again, this is just sort of applying individual colors to each retracement as opposed to that master that we just applied in the quick menu. From here, let me just actually illustrate this. I do believe I have a setup already. So TB Fib Retrace is going to be something simple. Looks just like this, right? All we have are the 38.2, the 61.8, no backgrounds, and just the levels and price associated with it. Not all of those crazy other numbers that we had, or even the trend line that would connect our dots from point to point. If you want to turn that stuff off, again, it's in your settings. The trend line is going to be this option right here. If I turn that back on, notice how you now have this dashed line connecting the dots. I like it off. Again, you can explore this type of stuff, but that's where all of it exists and lives. The same thing is going to hold true for our Fibonacci extensions. So again, if we were looking at something like this from here to here to here, kind of a laser light show, I've got my fib extension already sort of outlined here. I'm going to remove that prior retracement, and there's sort of our extensions, right? So that's the template that I've come up with, but again, you can create whatever it is that you would prefer. And notice still that all of these things, as we've been making these drawings, do show up in the object tree on the right-hand side. And if I want to delete those fib extensions, I just have to press the little X, and poof, it disappears, right? The other Fibonacci tools are a little bit of a stretch in my imagination. We'll quickly walk through some of them. So here's the pitchfork. It makes something that looks like this. I personally don't use it in any of my analysis. I know some people do, so that's how you would activate it. And again, all of your settings and retracement sort of levels exist in the full menu, so you can sort of explore that. After this, I mean, really, guys, this stuff gets insane. So we're going to skip through some of these, but let's look at the I don't even know if it's GAN or GAN box, but this thing, I mean, I don't know about you, but that's just, it's not very useful for trading, right? I don't know what you're going to do with that. Maybe someone has a strategy for it somewhere, but for me, not really all that useful. Even, I mean, this thing gets crazier, right? Look at this thing. I don't know what you do with it, but it exists as a potential drawing tool here. Fibonacci circles exist. Again, what you do with that, totally up to you if it's something you want to use. Fibonacci spiral, I mean, I'm starting to feel like I'm getting into horoscopes and, reading the stuff stars here. This stuff is a bit of a stretch for my particular liking. I don't really use or identify any of this as useful, but you get the gist, right? So all of this is going to show up here, and we can delete it all by clicking the X's, or of course you could have pressed the little trash can right here. So those are your Fibonacci tools. Let's get into some more practical ones. The next one is going to be your brush and geometric shapes. The brush is pretty cool because it's going to allow us to do freeform drawing on the screen. A lot of people are always asking me about this tool right here that I'm using to draw the white spiral. That's a separate screen share presentation app that, again, you're going to have to install separately. It's called Demo Pro for anyone interested. But inside of TradingView, you can clearly, start to draw your own drawings with the brush tool here. So pretty cool that it's built right into the charting platform itself. Again, you can knock yourself out with changing all the colors. You can do anything you'd like here. So if we can draw a spiral, get something crazy, you can increase your thickness. If you like thicker lines, boom, again, feel free to explore all of this stuff. Now that you basically know how the templates work, you can save something that you like as a new template and then activate that whenever you'd like. Let's go ahead and move along through this menu. The highlighter is pretty cool because it's automatically going to give some transparency to whatever line you've drawn, but it's basically the same thing as the brush, right? If we click into here, notice the opacity by default will be set to 15%. So if we make it yellow, sure, it's going to be a highlighter, but it's not going to be as bright as our other brush tool, right? So that's the main difference there. Continuing along, rectangles are pretty cool. We're going to can everything on the screen, start from scratch. Rectangles are cool because you can do a couple of things here. So by default, you get this odd purple box. You can change the fill to something more interesting. And again, I sort of think of this in the utility sense in terms of support and resistance like we did with our trend lines. If you kind of like this as an option, you can change. Look, I've already got one called gap. We'll talk about that in a second. But let's go ahead and add some text here as well, right? So we'll go into the full menu. We'll add some text and we'll say support level. There we go. And what we'll do is we will put this inside the box and we will center it. So now we know that, actually, let's put it all the way to the right. So now we know that there's support there, and we'll change this to yellow so it contrasts nicely on the dark background, the dark green. Good. We'll save this template as a support. So SUP is fine. Save. Okay. Good to go. Let's say that we have a gap on the chart, right? And this is going to be essentially a preset that I've already built here, but you can, now that you know how to build these things, apply the same theory, right? So if I change this to gap and come in and draw in one of our gaps, boom, now we have an unfilled gap on our chart that we can be aware of, right? So that's one of the templates that I personally use whenever I'm looking at charts or potentially scanning for newsletters, and you know exactly how to create a new template just like that, right? So we've got support level, we've got gaps, that's all based on the rectangle. After that, we've got circle. Again, this stuff's pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to sit through all of these with us. Ellipse, you're going to get 4 points, and you can change the sort of thickness of that. What else do we have in here? Path is really cool, just because it helps in terms of visualizing different patterns, right? If we come back into path, which is this option right here, we can come from the top down to the low, do something like this and say, all right, if we have a double bottom break and retest, it might look something like this. To finish off the line, you just double click and it will lock in the end point, right? So what we've done, is drawn in this double bottom here. There's the neckline, there's the break and retest, and we're forecasting some sort of upward move. Again, it's just sort of a helpful visual to assist with your analysis, and that's a pretty great one here, considering that the brush tool can get a little bit sloppy, right? If we tried to do that with the brush, notice how it doesn't quite look as clean. We have these wonky edges. It gets a little rounded down there. It's not the end of the world, but again, just a more precise way of drawing something that would look similar to what we have there. Let's clear that up and finish off our tools here. Triangle, rotated rectangle. Again, you guys can explore that stuff on your own. I don't want to take up too much of your time. The text tool is very cool. If we put in text on the screen, so let's go with test 1 and press OK. Notice that the test is going to move around as we drag the chart. But if we come into the text box window and put in an anchored piece of text, I'll move this to the top corner. We'll change this to a larger size and yellow. And we'll just say something like a text as an anchored text. Oops, XT, there we go. So anchored text. Now notice as I move the chart window, it's anchored in place. It is not going to move with our chart window. It is locked and loaded in time. I can click and move it around. I can change the width, or excuse me, not width, but size of the font here directly in the quick menu. All of those settings still apply. You can save it as a template, so on and so forth. That's a cool difference between text and anchored text. You have the same thing with notes, anchored notes, signpost, tweet. This is very cool, and it is something worth exploring here. So if I activate the tweet tool, we get a little pop-up to insert a link, and I've already prepared a little link over here. This was a tweet we made on an analysis, it looks like on May 25th. If we want to just copy the URL. So that's slightly off the screen from you guys, but I'm going to copy the URL, and I'm going to come in, I'm going to paste it inside of this box here. I'll press OK. And what it's going to do is it's going to populate that tweet on our chart. Now I can click and move this, but what's really cool about this is that it's always going to have a pointer to the date when this tweet was released. So if you're trying to timestamp someone as, hey, you were bullish at this point in time, here's proof, you can add their tweet to a chart and it is going to show as where that tweet was originated on the screen in front of us. The same thing exists with TradingView ideas. If we click on idea here, we're going to get the same pop-up for a link. One of the members of our community is Contrary Trader. So we've grabbed one of his. We're going to copy the link. So copy. And we'll come back on over to the chart. We'll Command V to paste that in here and we'll press OK. And what you'll notice is that Contrary Trader was saying, hey, we should potentially be looking for shorts in the SPY around this area. Would you look at that? He was quite right with the rollover there. And again, it's going to timestamp when that idea was released so you can see how accurate someone was or potentially was not, right? So those are pretty cool tools here. Another thing that I would point out is that if I delete this and so right now, all I have copied to my clipboard is the link to that idea. If I just click on the chart and press Command V, it is going to paste that link directly as an idea. It will recognize that this is a TradingView link, an idea, and it will paste it as an idea. The same thing will hold true. We're going to go back on over to Twitter. I'm going to copy the URL at the top search bar, and I'm just going to click on the screen here and press Command V, and it will paste that idea again. I didn't even need to activate our tweet idea tool. So that's pretty cool. We're going to clear everything up, start from scratch once again, continuing on through our sort of drop down here. Images are fairly cool. If we press choose image and I come in and I add the thumbnail for our most recent YouTube video, you'll notice it'll take a second to think here. And once it does, we can press OK. And now we have an image imported on top of our chart. Right? And also notice down below it said you can use Command V to quick paste onto the screen. If I just press Command V, I believe it's actually going to paste the link, but we'll see in just a second here. Yeah, it's going to paste that last remembered link, not the image. But that's how you can add an image to your chart. Maybe you've got something interesting you want to add there, a little meme added to the chart, and that's how you would do it. All right, that's been a quick run through of our annotation tools. Let's get into some of the pattern tools. Again, I'm not really a big fan of these, but these are where they exist. X, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, blah, blah, blah patterns exist in here. Again, I don't know what you're going to do with this from an analysis perspective, but that's where it exists. And these are, of course, all of the controls for it. So you can knock yourself out with all of these tools. I'm actually not going to spend the time going through any of these other than at the very bottom, cyclic lines. This can be useful in terms of sort of marking options expirations. If you come in and you do something like this, and maybe you've sort of measured out where a full month's expiration is, this is how you could create something that, again, is just fairly simple, straightforward, and cyclical. You could do the same thing if we go all the way down to the bottom with the time cycles. And if I click and drag here, it's just going to show as a hump instead of a vertical line. And I believe there's one more, the sine wave. This, again, I don't really know what the use of that would be. But again, it's just giving you some sort of idea of a cyclical repeatable theory. I'm going to can everything, start from scratch, and we'll move along here. This is a really cool one. If you're interested in potentially forecasting what positions might look like, let's say you're looking for a long down here, you want to adjust things to reflect what your thoughts are around the trade. Let's say you're aggressive, the target's way up here, and your stop loss is going to be just underneath the lows. You can see that your risk-reward ratio is certainly a 3-to-1. That means it's probably a decent trade to be looking for, at least from the risk-reward perspective. I don't know about the chart perspective. Again, that's going to require different analysis, but this is a pretty cool little information box, and it's going to tell you some statistics about the current trade, what your target is, what the percent increase required is, that price number, and the same sort of difference. So that'll be your profit, right? The amount there is the difference between your entry price and the exit price. What else actually, no, it's not. That is way off. I'm not sure what that is. So you can tell me down below in the comment section if you know what that is. And from there, we can, of course, continue along. So that's basically the long trade idea. The same thing is going to hold true for the short trade idea. So short position, say you shorted these areas up here, your stop loss is, of course, going to be above. And we're going to move this down below. And notice that as we sort of move this and make it in the past, it's going to show us that this trade actually worked out, right? So this box is green, indicating that we have won the trade. The stop loss is in place. All of the same statistics are still in place here on our chart, and that's just going to tell us that this trade has already unfolded, right? That's why this sort of different shade of green is from here to here. Anything after that is additional profit that we were not necessarily expecting based on the initial trade idea. So we're going to remove this one. Some other cool forecasting tools in here. Forecast is just going to give us an idea of, the actual stats required to make it to a certain point in time. If we're expecting a massive reversal back up to these highs in here, we can see that it would require about a 10.63% move in 51 days. And the time for that to happen would be by August 11th of 2022. So just an interesting forecast model. What else do we have? Date ranges, pretty self-explanatory. It's going to tell you how far between point A and point B. Same thing is going to hold true with your price range from point A to point B vertically. We can also, I'm going to go ahead and trash everything again. We can do the same thing with a box. So showing both of those things at the same time, both the distance in time and price, and that's going to show up in a little information window right here. Again, for everything we've discussed, you can change all of the settings in this little quick menu or in the full settings menu right here. We're not going to spend too much time on it again because I feel like the video is getting a little long. You guys probably want me to move along with it. That's what we've got there. A couple of other cool ones. Projection. Again, we sort of talked about this. In terms of angle, I don't necessarily know how useful that is, but it's just kind of an interesting little tool that's available here. Then the last one in this window that I wanted to point out is really the fixed range volume profile. Just like we had the sort of anchored VWAP tucked in with the trendline tools at the top, I don't know why they put this in here, but if you use this to sort of classify a range, you're going to get just a volume profile for that particular range that you've identified. It can be super helpful if you're looking at like the a balance area, right, where the market is finding value over a particular course of time, right? So if I come back in and do it from here to here, which is where that little balance area is, I know it's showing up as fairly small on the screen in front of us, but that's going to give us a little volume profile in that area and show us where the value is. So pretty cool one that, again, is sort of tucked away and hidden. I wish it was a little bit more exposed, but that's kind of where it's at. Let's wrap this thing up. We've got some icons showing up in the very bottom. This is where you can kind of have fun with it, right? If you want the chart to go up, maybe you're doing a broadcast and you're like, hey, would you go up? Maybe you do something like this and you're encouraging the chart to go higher. There's some other funny ones in here. I believe there's a rocket ship somewhere. It's somewhere. It'll catch my eye in just a moment. Rocket ship, there it is. So let's say we want to add a rocket ship. We want to make it yellow. And one thing that I would point out is that you might notice as I'm trying to scale this from the top and bottom, it's not going to work. This is what rotates the image. And then to scale the icon, you need to use the sidebars. Okay, so hey, SPY, head higher, follow this rocket ship higher. That's, you can get kind of funny and do things like that on your chart screen. What else can you do if you want the market to go lower? Maybe you come on and you find a magnet and you're like, hey, come back down closer to this magnet, try to pull prices down there. It's really not that useful, but just kind of more comical and fun if you're interested in putting things on your chart. All I'm doing is activating and pressing backspace on my keyboard to get rid of those drawings. All right, we're almost home. Just a couple of more things to point out here. The measuring tool is going to be very similar to the time and date range, but all it's going to be is if I click again, it's going to show for a second and then click one more time elsewhere, it's going to disappear. So if you want to make a quick measurement, you can do so and not have any permanent changes to your chart. Click off, and now that information box is now gone. The zoom tool, pretty straightforward. If you click and zoom, and that's click and drag, by the way, on a certain section of the chart, we've zoomed in. If you want to zoom back out to exactly where you were a second ago, you just press the zoom out function, and now we're at that same sort of zoom scale. The next section underneath is going to be in relationship to how different drawing tools respond, okay? So if I go back to our trend line, which is going to be the sort of king of them all, this is really where we spent the most time, and we fire up our trend line sort of look and feel that we've created. If I do something like this, I have free reign of the trend line. If I want this to stick to candle highs and candle lows, I can come in here and I can turn on the strong magnet. And what this is going to do is basically ensure that this snaps to any candle high, open, or close, or low for that particular session, right? So as I'm moving this around, I have 4 potential places that it will snap to. And as I'm moving it around, you can see it jumping around instead of moving freely, where I unclick the magnet mode. Now I have free reign and I can put this wherever I'd like based on my cursor, not so much based on any sort of snapping action to a candle high or candle low. There's also a weak magnet, which is just going to mean it's not going to, right? It's not going to go crazy. If I move the cursor over here, it'll follow my cursor. But if I start getting closer to that price action, it will certainly snap to those highs and lows, all right? So that's the weak magnet. Next up, stay in drawing mode. This is something that you might have noticed. Every single time that you draw a trend line or anything, we revert back to the cursor tool. You can see that active now at the top of the screen. If you want to stay in drawing mode and make, let's say, more than one drawing at a time, you can click on this little icon here, stay in drawing mode. And what will happen is when we activate the trend line tool, we can draw one trend line, we can draw another trend line, we can keep drawing trend lines until we want to switch back to the cursor and now we're out of drawing mode, right? So that is how you keep that sort of enabled to draw multiple things at once without having to re-click the trend line over and over and over again. This little lock is going to lock all of the drawings that we have on the screen in front of us. If I click and drag, I can't move it. If I click and drag, I can't move it because our master lock is on over here. An interesting thing to point out is that it's not going to show up in your object tree. Instead, it's just going to show as, we can't move this because the master lock is on. I'm going to turn that off. We can now move things once again. There we go. And then after that, we have our show and hide all. If I click on this, it's going to hide everything. If I turn it back on, it's going to show everything. You can also do this for indicators, positions and orders, or hide all. So because this is a drawing tutorial, we're just doing hide drawings. But if you wanted to do that with indicators, you could do so as well. And as we've pointed out already, we of course have our trash can. We can remove all of the drawings, which we have been doing. You could remove the indicators, or you could remove both the drawings and the indicators at the same time. Now there's one final thing. Yes, I have one more thing, if you can believe it, to talk to you in terms of drawing tools. Number one, I suppose there's actually two. I lied. I'm so sorry. Number one is going to be the layering of objects, which we said that we would point out before we sort of sign off here. If I create a rectangle and I create a solid fill here, so I'll bump the opacity all the way up, notice how the rectangle is above the trend line, right? You cannot see the white dashed line through the yellow box. If I change the order of the trend line to the top, now the trend line is technically above, and I don't think yellow is a good example for this. Let's change this to something like purple here. That'll be an obvious one, okay? So the trend line is above. If I drag it underneath, the trend line is now below when I deactivate it. If I hover over the trend line, it will show above. The other way we can do this, and again, this is going way back to the beginning of the video, is if we click on the three dots, go to visual order and bring to front, it will bring it all the way to the front, okay? So that's visual ordering. And then now, finally, for our finale here, this I promise is the last one. We're gonna look at favorited tools, okay? So my favorites are going to be our trend line, our horizontal ray, as well as the ray tool. With these three things, you'll notice that we have this little pop-up on our screen now with those tool icons on the pop-up. If you don't have that, look at the bottom left of your screen, and there's gonna be a little star that's either toggled or not. If we untoggle it, that little menu goes away, and if we toggle it on, the menu pops up. If the menu doesn't exist for you in the first place, it's because you don't have any favorites, right? If I unfavorite everything, notice that our star in the bottom left goes away. If you want favorites, if you want that little quick shortcut menu, all you have to do is come in and highlight with a star all of your favorite tools, and that is ultimately going to do it for today's video. We have our little sort of favorites here. There's our sort of template that we've already created. Let's say that that's resistance. We know all of these things now. That has been a full in-depth analysis of all of the tools, the drawing tools that is, inside of TradingView. If you appreciated the tutorial or learned anything new, let me know in the comments section or by giving the video a thumbs up. And with that being said, I wish you all a green trading week.